Our story begins with Kazuya, a high school boy who's always cherished his late mother's kimono sash. One day, however, Kazuya wakes up from a bad dream, only to discover that he's accidentally touching Chisato, his classmate and childhood friend. After escaping her wrath, Kazuya goes to the roof, where he smells his late mother's kimono sash and is comforted by its familiar cherry blossom aroma. Suddenly, Kazuya is attacked by a possessed wig that knocks him off the building. And just as he's certain he's about to die, his mother's kimono sash transforms into a blue-haired girl named KIRIHA that saves Kazuya's life. She is a tsukumogami, which in Japanese folklore is an inanimate object that has gained a spirit through long years of harmony with their owners. Their opponent, however, is an amasogi, which are spirits born from strong malevolent desires. In this case, the amasogi was born from a wig due to the host's strong love for Kazuya. As KIRIHA fights off against the amasogi and its host, she threatens Kazuya to become her loyal servant, or else she'll hand him over to their opponent. With no other choice, Kazuya agrees to be her servant, allowing KIRIHA to put an end to the fight by piercing through the wig. But while Kazuya tends to the unconscious host, KIRIHA vanishes out of sight. Later that night, Kazuya reflects on the day's crazy events before falling asleep, and has another nightmare. When he reawakens, however, he finds KIRIHA in his bed laying next to him, and screams in shock. This causes Kazuya's little sister to run up the stairs and see what all the commotion is about, but she finds that nothing is out of the ordinary as she is unaware that Kazuya has hidden KIRIHA behind his bed. After his sister leaves, KIRIHA reminds Kazuya that he agreed to be her servant, and sends him off to buy her some pudding. After dinner, KIRIHA surprisingly joins Kazuya in the bath and offers to wash his back. Kazuya is taken aback by this, but she reminds him that they used to bathe together all the time in the past when she was still in her kimono sash form, and pokes fun at how much Kazuya's manhood has grown since then. That night, the two share a bed once more, and Kazuya remembers how he used to sleep with his mother's kimono sash all the time, and KIRIHA's familiar cherry blossom aroma manages to ease his mind. Despite this, Kazuya is understandably still too uncomfortable to sleep with such a beauty. The next morning, KIRIHA wakes up before Kazuya and watches him sleep. But when he talks badly about her in his sleep, she decides to put an end to his family tree. To make matters worse, Kazuya is late for school because of her and is punished by Chisato once he arrives. She then drags him to the library so he can catch up on his incomplete homework. Once there, the two reminisce about how Chisato used to tutor Kazuya when they were younger, which leads Chisato to ask if she could come over to his house to tutor him again. And although Kazuya is tempted to say yes, he refuses out of fear of KIRIHA being discovered. After they finish their homework, the two suddenly find themselves trapped in the library and are unable to escape. Suddenly, Kazuya spots KIRIHA in the library for some reason, and is forced to introduce her to Chisato. KIRIHA then explains that they are trapped within the library because of an amasogi, much like the wig they had encountered the previous day, and they must find the evil spirit's host in order to escape. But when they can't find any clues leading them to the host, KIRIHA decides to take matters into her own hands, or her own cloths I should say, and attempts to break free. This only makes the situation worse, however, as the library begins to transform into a giant book golem. But as KIRIHA fights back, she notices that the books are defending Chisato, and realizes that she is the host of the amasogi. Seeing this, KIRIHA tells Kazuya that he must fulfill Chisato's desire in order to free them. Kazuya then thinks back to what might be Chisato's desire, and decides to ask her if she would like to come to his house to tutor him, which makes the library return to normal after she agrees. The next day, Chisato visits Kazuya to tutor him, only to find him in bed with KIRIHA and punishes him thoroughly for this indecency. Afterwards, Chisato apologizes for causing the situation at the library, but KIRIHA reassures her that it was not entirely her fault, because the amasogi was created due to an abnormally high concentration of evil energy, which should never have happened, and that the blame is on KUKURI, the local deity in charge of such things. The next day, SHIRO, one of Kazuya's friends, is approached by KOKUYO, a large-chested shrine maiden who works for KUKURI. Hoping to be able to feel her huge melons, SHIRO invites her out to lunch, which she agrees to. SHIRO soon regrets this invitation, however, when KOKUYO drains his wallet by ordering nearly everything on the menu. The next day at school, SHIRO attacks Kazuya as he blames him for the abuse his wallet suffered the previous day. Moments later, students notice that several of their lunches have been eaten by someone else, but it doesn't take long for them to realize that KOKUYO is the culprit. She then orders Kazuya to accompany her to see KUKURI, but tells him that his washcloth should stay behind. Angered by being called a washcloth, KIRIHA transforms into her human form and challenges her to an arm wrestling match, and says that if she wins, she gets to go with Kazuya to meet KUKURI. After agreeing to the terms of the duel, they go up to the roof and change into gym uniforms, which the boys greatly enjoy. Once the duel begins, however, the two girls engage in deadly one-armed melee combat, rather than arm wrestling. And after a fierce trade of blows, KIRIHA is eventually victorious. They are then taken to see KUKURI, who greets them while wearing a strange mask. After introducing herself, KUKURI asks Kazuya to become an exorcist, and explains that he has a rare ability to attract amasogi, but KIRIHA refuses to put him in harm's way. When they try to leave, however, KUKURI traps them inside a barrier and forces the two to fight her. KIRIHA tries her best to fend off KUKURI's water attacks, but finds herself quickly overwhelmed by her impressive power. KIRIHA then looks on in terror as KUKURI casts one of her most powerful spells onto them. KIRIHA barely manages to defend against the attack, but is left exhausted and begins to reduce into her chibi form as she uses up more and more of her power. KUKURI then uses the same attack a second time, completely destroying KIRIHA's defense while flooding both Kazuya and her. But as Kazuya passes out, he converses with a vision of his mother, who instructs him to fight alongside KIRIHA by using her true name. When he awakens, Kazuya calls out KIRIHA's true name, which transforms her back into her kimono sash form, allowing him to wield her as a weapon, and even mimic his mother's signature drill technique. This attack is stopped by KUKURI, however, who grabs a hold of KIRIHA and threatens Kazuya to accept becoming an exorcist, or else she'll rip his washcloth to shreds. And in order to save KIRIHA's life, Kazuya has no choice but to agree. Suddenly, the strings that hold KUKURI's mask snap off, reducing her into a chibi form as well. Upon seeing this, KIRIHA immediately begins to mock KUKURI. Afterwards, KUKURI explains that this was all a ploy so Kazuya would learn to wield KIRIHA, and an angry KIRIHA punishes her for this. On their way back home, however, Kazuya promises KIRIHA that he'll try his best to become a powerful exorcist so he can keep her safe. Once home, KIRIHA phones several people to ask for little girl clothes for KIRIHA to wear, but everyone he calls confuses him for a creep. Eventually, his friend Osamu happily provides him with several outfits from his own collection. Unfortunately, these are all weird cosplay outfits, with one of them basically just being a couple of strings. As time passes, KIRIHA trains Kazuya to become an exorcist, but she's frustrated when he's unable to replicate the skills displayed during their battle with KUKURI. Afterwards, KIRIHA explains that it's important for him to learn to wield her as a weapon, since spirits like her are much more vulnerable in their human forms. Meanwhile, KUKURI and KOKUYO don't have money to get the shrine fixed, and it eventually collapses during a storm. Because of this, they have to move their quarters to the park and are ridiculed by KIRIHA when she happens to pass by. The next day at school, Kazuya is summoned by the school's student council president, who was also the host of the wig amasogi they had previously encountered. He asks Kazuya and KIRIHA to investigate a series of mysterious amasogi manifestations that have been occurring with the Tabletop Games Association. Their investigation soon leads them to Nakajima, but when they confront him, he summons a minotaur by drawing it on a notepad possessed by an evil spirit, and orders it to attack Kazuya and KIRIHA in hopes of forcing the student council president to recognize the Tabletop Games Association as an official club. Unable to battle the Minotaur head-on, Kazuya, KIRIHA, and Osamu attempt to outsmart Nakajima by erasing his Minotaur with a fire extinguisher. But despite this being successful, Nakajima simply summons another Minotaur to continue fighting them. However, Osamu manages to steal the possessed notebook, and draws an even stronger dragon to defeat the Minotaur. After their victory, the group agrees to destroy the Amasogi notepad. But before doing so, Osamu uses it to draw an adult version of KIRIHA, which just ends up beating up Kazuya. Sometime later, a student named Hiroshi confesses his love to Chisato, but she rejects him as she is already in love with someone else. Upon hearing this, Kazuya wonders who Chisato might be in love with, much to KIRIHA's annoyance. When they arrive at school the next day, Kazuya is shocked to see that the entire school has been turned into a dating sim game due to an amasogi. To make matters worse, Hiroshi and Chisato seem to be getting along better than ever before, which leads KIRIHA to realize that Hiroshi must be the host of this amasogi. When Kazuya tries to confront him about this, however, Chisato slaps him in defense of Hiroshi. Kazuya then realizes that in order to save his childhood friend, he is forced to compete with Hiroshi for Chisato's affection by playing the game. However, none of the dialogue options that Kazuya chooses go as planned, and Chisato ends up hating him even more. Kazuya then enlists Osamu's help to win Chisato's affection, and together they abuse a glitch that can help Kazuya win the game. When Hiroshi is about to ask Chisato out under the cherry blossom tree, Kazuya interrupts him before he can finish, by pulling two dolls out of his backpack, and telling Chisato that he wants to play house with her like they did when they were kids. Thanks to this, Chisato's affection is raised to the maximum level, as she reminisces about the time she used to play house with Kazuya in kindergarten. Afterwards, KIRIHA and Osamu chase after Hiroshi, while Kazuya and Chisato head to the infirmary so they can rest. When KIRIHA and Osamu finally catch Hiroshi, he reveals that the amasogi is actually just a CD in the computer lab. Surprised by this, Osamu realizes that Hiroshi unknowingly used the PC version of the dating sim game, which turns out to be the adult version. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Kazuya is tied to the bed by Chisato, who's determined to play house like real adults. Desperate to save Kazuya before it's too late, KIRIHA rushes to the infirmary, while Osamu and Hiroshi rush to the computer lab and destroy the amasogi. Unfortunately, KIRIHA arrives too late and is shocked by what she witnesses. Afterwards, Chisato and Kazuya are flustered around each other and refuse to disclose what they did together. The next day, while Kazuya heads out to buy some pudding, KIRIHA and KUKURI have a little friendly chat while building a sand dam, until a duo of rowdy boys come to ruin it. This angers KIRIHA and causes her to go after them until Kazuya arrives to stop her. He then takes both girls home to get cleaned up, but while in the bath they continue their little spat that lasts until both of them pass out from heat exhaustion. Afterwards, KUKURI heads back home to the park while Kazuya and KIRIHA settle down for dinner. But after dinner, Kazuya plans to take some of his large leftovers to KIRIHA, only to learn that his family already knew about her existence, because Kazuya's father knew her ever since he began courting Kazuya's mother way back in high school, where KIRIHA always gave him a rough time. Afterwards, Kazuya decides to bring KUKURI some pudding too, only to find that their temporary shrine has been demolished by the city after some parents complained about it being a safety hazard to children. Seeing this, KIRIHA takes pity on them and invites them to stay with Kazuya and her. This is initially met with opposition from Kazuya's sister and father, but Kazuya's father quickly changes his mind when KIRIHA threatens to blackmail him with the embarrassing love letters that he wrote to Kazuya's mother when they were teenagers. Sometime later, Kazuya's sister grows tired of KIRIHA always lounging around the house doing nothing but eating snacks and watching anime recaps, so she forces her to help prepare dinner. She then sends Kazuya and the girls to go buy extra ingredients at the supermarket. But when they arrive there and Kazuya refuses to buy KIRIHA some pudding, she begins to throw a tantrum, until he eventually gives in to her demands. He then decides to buy KUKURI some sweets too, and she begins to imagine what being married to him would be like. And when they return home, the two girls happily enjoy their desserts together. The next day at school, Kazuya finds that SHIRO has mysteriously become incredibly popular with women, and they quickly realize that SHIRO's been using a perfume possessed by an amasogi, which instantly makes the wearer popular with all the girls that smell it. When the boys in school hear about this, however, they all fight to have the perfume for themselves, forcing Kazuya to take SHIRO away to the roof, where he convinces him to destroy the perfume. But it instead bounces up and covers Kazuya. The effects soon become apparent when he races home after being chased by several girls throughout town. But when he arrives home, Kazuya is relieved to see that his sister is still acting normally around him. So he hops into the bath to try to wash away the scent, but is soon joined by his sister, much to his embarrassment. One by one, the girls of the house all enter the bathroom and join Kazuya in the tub. Wish that was me. The next day at school, SHIRO begins emitting a foul stench for the whole week straight, as a consequence of not destroying the bottle properly. As time goes on, Kazuya and KIRIHA continue to train by doing mock battles with KUKURI, but KIRIHA becomes more and more infuriated as they continue to lose. The next day, Kazuya, Chisato, and Osamu are summoned by the student council president to investigate the appearance of an amasogi that has taken on the appearance of a girl named Aiko, who had taken her own life 2 years prior. During their investigation, they run into Nanako, a member of the school's newspaper club who is also investigating the same case. Suddenly, Aiko appears and attacks the group, but she manages to escape after Kazuya successfully fends off her attacks. As they continue their investigation and consolidate clues, they uncover information about Aiko's little sister being enrolled at their school, under the name Nanako. They race to find her and eventually confront her about this new information. Nanako then explains that she was deeply distraught by her sister's death, and after finding a lock of her hair, it transformed into an amasogi. She blamed her sister's death on the students who bullied her, but when Nanako reads Aiko's final letter, which had been kept hidden from her, she learns that Aiko took her life due to an amasogi that had began growing on her chest, and that it soon began demanding the death of Nanako, forcing Aiko to end her life in order to save her sister. Heartbroken that her sister died for her, Aiko transforms into an even stronger amasogi that feeds off of Nanako's negative energy. Kazuya struggles to combat it at first, but through KIRIHA's coaching, he eventually gains the upper hand and defeats it. KIRIHA then encourages Nanako to try and find a reason to live, because if she continues wishing to die, then her sister's death would have been for nothing. Meanwhile, a mysterious girl watches from afar. While leaving school the next day, Kazuya is attacked by Tsuneo, another exorcist. And when KIRIHA comes to his defense, Tsuneo is forced to reveal her partner, Kotetsu, who transforms into a sword. But as the fight comes to an end, she expresses her disappointment in Kazuya's fighting ability and calls him unfit to be KIRIHA's wielder. The four of them then head to Kazuya's home, where KUKURI explains that she had given Tsuneo permission to test Kazuya's abilities, which KIRIHA punishes her for. Tsuneo then explains that when she was a child, Kazuya's mother had killed the amasogi responsible for her brother's death, depriving her of the opportunity to get revenge. As such, she became fixated on defeating Kazuya's mother instead, but could never match her in battle, which is why she is sickened by Kazuya's inexperience. She then tells Kazuya that he is unfit to be his mother's replacement and challenges him to a duel over KIRIHA, which KIRIHA agrees to, despite Kazuya remaining silent. That night, Kazuya becomes depressed as he reflects on all the trouble he's caused thus far, and feels that it's best to just let Tsuneo become his mother's replacement. However, KIRIHA grows impatient with him and forces him to strip to embarrass him. She then begins encouraging him to fight by reassuring him that she'll always be on his side no matter what, and tells him that if he wins, she'll reward him. KIRIHA then suddenly reverts back to her original adult form, and the two begin thinking of a plan to win the upcoming duel. Kazuya and KIRIHA then spend the next few days training to prepare for Tsuneo's sword techniques, since their cloth powers are naturally disadvantaged against swords. Meanwhile, Tsuneo also trains with her local deity and becomes convinced that there's no way she'll lose, despite Kotetsu warning her not to underestimate Kazuya. That night, while Kazuya and KIRIHA get ready for bed, he proclaims that he'll win no matter what and that he won't let anything happen to KIRIHA. This greatly embarrasses her, as she was previously always the one protecting him. On the day of the duel, Tsuneo thinks about Kazuya being unworthy of being his mother's successor, while Kazuya thinks about his responsibility for attracting amasogi and how Tsuneo treats Kotetsu like a tool. Once the duel begins, Kazuya attacks immediately with a new doll technique that he devised with KIRIHA, but Tsuneo pierces through it. And as the fight continues, Tsuneo finds herself more and more pressured by Kazuya's new techniques that she's never seen before. Finally seeing an opening, Tsuneo goes in for the final strike. But her attack is blocked by Kazuya's hand weave technique, and he immediately counterattacks. Kotetsu then warns her about conserving her energy, but she ignores him. The fight then suddenly comes to a standstill as both combatants plan their next moves. Despite being stronger with his ranged attacks, Kazuya tells KIRIHA that he's not willing to play it safe to ensure victory, as he wants to beat Tsuneo at her full strength to prove that KIRIHA and Kotetsu are more than just tools. Kazuya then charges at her while she concentrates her energy to use her secret technique, known as Hibikiri. At that same time, Kazuya and KIRIHA become one, and his hair turns into a glowing white, while his eyes turn a bright red. This is called ascension, which is a controlled state similar to being possessed by an amasogi that can only be used by highly skilled exorcists. Kazuya then wraps his arms in cloth to parry Tsuneo's attacks, and the two continue to trade blows in deadly melee combat, with neither one giving an inch to their opponent, until Kazuya ends up breaking Kotetsu and uses his finishing move to put an end to the fight. With Kazuya declared the winner, Tsuneo gracefully accepts defeat and learns to cherish Kotetsu more. As they say their goodbyes, they decide to go back home to celebrate, but Kazuya collapses from fatigue, a side effect of using ascension. That night, KIRIHA remembers that she promised Kazuya to reward him for winning, so she strips him down and rewards him by washing every inch of his body with KUKURI's help, as she once again fantasizes about being married to Kazuya. The next morning, KUKURI is shocked to find Kazuya and KIRIHA in bed together with no clothes on. Meanwhile, Tsuneo's mother reprimands her for causing trouble and losing a duel. She then says that the only way Tsuneo can inherit the family estate now is if she marries the man who defeated her. Later on at school, the class is introduced to a new exchange student. To their surprise, the new student is KIRIHA. But when the other male students see how close she is with Kazuya, they grow jealous and demand to know the nature of their relationship, to which KIRIHA replies that they are intimately familiar. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon.